India's electronics industry is surging ahead. From being a minor player in 2014, India is now the second largest mobile phone manufacturer globally. With over 20% of the world's mobile phones made here, India has seen a five-fold increase in production value, jumping from $29 billion in 2014 to over $87 billion in 2023. As global demand grows, India's influence in the electronics value chain is becoming impossible to ignore. The global electronics value chain is responsible for over 30% of the world's manufacturing value. India, with its growing workforce and innovation potential, is making its mark. But where does India stand, and how can it rise to the top of this competitive arena? India's electronics production hit $87 billion in fiscal year 23, growing at an annual rate of 17%. Mobile phone manufacturing is a standout, making India the second largest producer globally. However, India's production remains heavily reliant on imported components like semiconductors, leading to a trade imbalance. India imported $70 billion worth of electronics components in fiscal year 23, including 90% of its semiconductor needs. To secure its future in the global value chain, India must transition from a low-value assembly hub to a center of innovation and high-tech manufacturing. India's electronics sector faces several structural and operational challenges. The most pressing is the lack of a domestic semiconductor manufacturing base. India imports over 90% of its semiconductors, which are essential for mobile devices, computers, and other electronics. This dependence makes the country vulnerable to global supply chain disruptions, as seen during the pandemic. In 2021, global chip shortages delayed the production of over 1 million vehicles in India, highlighting the urgent need for local semiconductor capabilities. Another critical challenge is infrastructure. India's logistics costs, at 14% of GDP, are almost double the global average, making Indian exports less competitive. Moreover, the manufacturing clusters are not fully integrated, leading to inefficiencies in the supply chain. China, by contrast, has built integrated electronics manufacturing clusters, such as in Shenzhen, where design, production, and logistics are streamlined, reducing costs and time to market. Lastly, the skill gap is another major obstacle. While India has a large workforce, only 20% are skilled in advanced manufacturing processes required for high-tech electronics production, which limits India's ability to scale up complex manufacturing processes like chip design and fabrication. Asian countries have developed forward-thinking policies that have propelled them to the forefront of global electronics manufacturing. China's Made in China 2025 strategy is aimed at achieving 70% self-sufficiency in key technologies, including semiconductors, by 2025. The country invested $150 billion in this sector between 2014 and 2022, building a robust domestic semiconductor industry. By 2022, China's semiconductor output had grown by 33%, making it one of the largest producers in the world. Similarly, Vietnam has focused on attracting multinational companies through aggressive tax incentives and trade agreements. Samsung's decision to establish its largest smartphone factory in Vietnam is a prime example of how these policies have worked. Today, electronics account for nearly 35% of Vietnam's total exports, making it a critical part of the global supply chain. Vietnam's electronics exports grew from $47.3 billion in 2015 to over $100 billion by 2022. In South Korea, the government's focus on R&D, coupled with substantial public-private partnerships, has cemented its place as a leader in memory chip production. South Korea spends over 4% of its GDP on research and development, which has enabled companies like Samsung and SK Hynix to dominate the global memory chip market. In 2021, South Korea exported over $128 billion in semiconductors, representing 19% of global semiconductor exports. India's government has outlined outlined a bold vision for FY30, aiming to increase electronics production to $300 billion and position India as a global leader in this sector. The Production-Linked Incentive (PLI) scheme, which offers incentives based on incremental sales of locally manufactured products, is a key pillar of this strategy. The PLI scheme is expected to attract investments of $10 billion by 2025 and generate over 3 million jobs across the electronics sector. Mobile phone manufacturing, already a major growth area, is expected to play a pivotal role in India's FY30 vision. The government aims to increase India's share in global mobile exports to 20%. The scheme has already attracted top players like Apple and Samsung, which are setting up production facilities across the country. India exported $12 billion worth of mobile phones in FY23, and this is expected to increase to $50 billion by 2030. India also plans to focus on semiconductors. The government has launched a $10 billion initiative to promote semiconductor fabrication in India, with an aim to reduce its reliance on imports and build a self-sufficient ecosystem. Global players like Foxconn and Vedanta have announced plans to establish semiconductor fabrication units in India, which could drastically alter the country's electronics landscape by 2030. Beyond mobile phones and semiconductors, India aims to expand its footprint in high-value electronics like display panels, EV batteries, and consumer electronics. The goal is to increase local value addition to 40% by 2030, reducing the dependence on imported components. For India to achieve its FY30 vision, several key reforms are necessary. First, the development of a robust semiconductor ecosystem is essential. The government's $10 billion semiconductor initiative must be coupled with long-term investments in research, infrastructure, and skills development to create a full-fledged semiconductor supply chain. India plans to invest over $30 billion by 2026 in building semiconductor fabs, with incentives for global players to set up manufacturing units in India. Second, India needs to focus on skilling its workforce. By collaborating with educational institutions and industry leaders, India can create specialized training programs in electronics manufacturing, including areas like chip design, AI, and IoT. India aims to upskill 30 million workers by 2030 through public-private partnerships and vocational training programs. Third, India must improve its logistics and supply chain infrastructure to reduce costs. By upgrading roads, ports, and warehousing capabilities, India can bring its logistics costs closer to the global average, making its products more competitive internationally. Reducing logistics costs from 14% to 8% of GDP would save the Indian economy nearly $40 billion annually and significantly boost export competitiveness. With bold reforms, strategic investments, and a focus on innovation, India has the potential to emerge as a global leader in electronics manufacturing by 2030. The road ahead is challenging, but the rewards could transform India into a powerhouse in the global electronics value chain. Subscribe for more insights into India's economic journey and the global innovation race.